Thanks, everyone. Really happy to be here. Thanks for joining. Excited to be with Chris here from Happy Money. So let me just share my screen real quick over here, and we will get started. So I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. If not, somehow shout out. So the idea that we'll cover today is really thinking about how machine learning and kind of iteration on machine learning is going to be affecting businesses in a world that's been put up a little bit upside down. So it's my great pleasure to be talking with Chris today, who's the VP of Data Science for Happy Money. I'll let him introduce himself and a little bit more about what Happy Money does. And then we can dive into how teams are thinking about the machine learning operations space and scaling in ever-changing world. So,
Awesome.
Said, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself and Happy Money?
Thank you, Diego. Thanks for having me. And nice to meet everybody. Thanks for coming. So yeah, I'm Courtney. I'm the head of the data science team at Happy Money. I've been with the company for around 6 years. So I've been there from the time we gave our first loan out to now we've done over $2 billion in loan originations. A little background on our company. Our mission is to help borrowers become savers. We're located in Southern California. I really wanted to include this slide because since we're talking about the new normal, I wanted to show our beautiful building that we waited 2 years to finish construction on, that we moved into on March 1st of this year. So we were able to enjoy it for a full 2 weeks before quarantine started and haven't been back. So it's been interesting. We can go to the next slide. So what Happy Money is really a machine learning driven company. We're basically a platform to help connect credit unions, our credit union partners, to consumers and give them sort of a national footprint and help with not only the outreach and attracting different types of consumers, but also helping with decisioning, with servicing loans, with behavioral models that help people not only eliminate debt, but stay out of debt. So we're really interested in this borrower to saver journey. We're trying to get people to pay off debt, stay out of debt, build new habits to change the way that they've approached debt in the past, and start saving. And to do that, it's really all driven by machine learning. And so that's why we're a good case study for this topic, primarily because we're definitely feeling all of the changes that are going on with COVID in a number of ways that we'll talk about more. But we're also going through a pretty massive growth phase in our company. We're going from sort of a very startup kind of infrastructure to now a much bigger scaling infrastructure and moving to the cloud from an on-prem server and all of that sort of thing. So lots of growing pains happening all at once, but it's exciting times for sure. We'll talk more about it.
Yeah, and I was particularly excited, hearing the subject because you mentioned it, Chris. You really are a machine learning powered organization. Like every single decision that the business makes is really data driven. And it's kind of like, how this business exists, right? I mean, driven by data science and machine learning, which is exciting to see kind of this like new era of businesses that are pretty much entirely driven by ML.
That's right. And so we're connected to credit unions. And the reason that they're interested in us is we're ethos aligned, right? Like they're nonprofits and they're trying to do the best for their members, right? And we are too. We actually make money based on people doing the right thing, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. But they're really interested in us because we have a little bit more technical chops than most of the credit unions out there that we partner with. And so they can really link up with us and we handle all parts of the decisioning process. We service the loan and we have machine learning models like for every step, like the verifications, the underwriting decision itself, and behavioral models that kind of help people guide their path like out of debt and into savings.
Absolutely.
So what we're really trying to do is disrupt what we see as this debt industrial complex. We've got credit bureaus, which are basically just a big data center for debt data. FICO itself is built basically solely on debt data. And the weird thing is that you need to kind of build up some debt first and pay it down to have access to affordable credit. So FICO itself is made up primarily of payment history and utilization on credit cards. So if you don't first build up some debt, you don't really get a good FICO score. It's all about building up and paying it down. So I like to draw the parallel that it feels a bit like starting a drug prevention program and saying that you have to try a little bit of heroin before you enter. And so our job is to try to get people off this heroin and sort of build them up and score them more accurately based on positive attributes like adding to savings and things like that. So we look at people more holistically than just credit and debt data. The other part that's tricky is that credit cards are making access to credit much easier, right, at the point of sale. And now things like Apple Card is making that even easier. You don't even need to have a physical card. And it's all just giving people super easy access to credit and letting people get into debt even faster. So Warren Buffett earlier this year had a quote that basically said, the best investment that he can think of is trying to get out of your credit card debt, and that he thinks people should stop relying on their credit cards as a piggy bank. And so at Happy Money, we're also big into doing a lot of psychological research. We think that there's an inextricable link between your psychological mindset and your financial behavior, right? And so if you go to the next slide, Diego, some of the research that I've been doing recently in the past, since May, so May, June, and July, we've collected data from 5,000 people across the country each month. And we're looking at, this is one interesting finding, this is part of a much larger study, but looking at this idea that people are actually using their credit cards as kind of a replacement for a savings account. And this is something that definitely resonated with me as a grad student in LA for 5 years, living in the heart of LA, making $18,000 to $22,000 a year. I was definitely building up some credit card debt, and I totally saw it this way. I was maxed out on all my cards basically. And when I had if I made my min pays each month, it was like I just added to my savings, and now I have $300 available to spend, you know? And the idea was that, or my thinking on this was that if you kind of get a taste of the sauce, then you really do start seeing the credit card debt as your savings replacement. So if you look at people who have basically, starting off, about 50% of people say savings is not, or credit cards are not a replacement for savings. And that's great. That's the right attitude to have for sure. But about the other 50% are somewhere along the spectrum. And if you look at people who have absolutely no credit card debt, only about 7% of them fall into these kinda or credit cards are my savings buckets, the two higher buckets on the top left corner there. But if you have even $1 in revolving credit card debt, you jump up to about 50%. It's 40 on this slide, but this is the data from May. It's actually gone up each month. And now it's over 50% of people with $1 or more in debt are viewing their credit cards as a savings replacement. And you can see that has a lot of negative impact on people. Credit card debt, the people who view credit card debt as savings tend to have more credit card debt, which makes sense. They also have much higher rates of financial stress. And if you go to the next slide, it's affecting their sense of resilience, optimism, and gratitude. So it's definitely a negative thing, and it's something that we want to try to counteract. And so that's part of, I'm just painting the picture that this is some of the behavioral stuff that we include and that we look at, and we kind of want to be able to understand our members and know how to speak to them and know what they're going through so that we can give the best sort of products to help solve.
And
so if you go,
and this, you know, to me, like, you know, like, I mean, this kind of like showcases, and obviously the topic of today's conversation, which is, you know, you mentioned how, you know, this jumped from May to, you know, to June. Like this is changing really quickly in this new world. It seems like, you know, like,
yes.
like all your models that are being used to kind of predict, you know, kind of like payments and how people are going to be interacting with their credit are very, very rapidly changing. So adaptability to that seems to be more important than ever.
That is exactly right, Diego. That sets me up for the next slide very well too. Thank you. What we're also seeing is that since the inception of credit cards, really in 1966, it's been just a constant build of debt over time, right? And the only time there's really been a big deleveraging on an aggregate or macro level period has been in that 2008, the Great Recession, right? So these times of economic instability and volatility tend to become sort of a look in the mirror moment, right? All of these people are feeling this lack of resilience and gratitude and optimism, and they think, it's time to make a change. And so people are actually looking to deleverage. And we've actually seen that quite a bit with the demand in our product going up through the roof, basically to the point of overreaching our capacity on our operations team. So a lot of my team's work has turned into automating a lot of the more manual processes that we had in verifications, just to open up the door to let people through. But we have to be able to do all of this during this super economically volatile time. And so we have to make sure that our models are accurate and we're getting it right? And that's something that's difficult to do. And it's something that requires a lot of rapid iteration and the ability to iterate quickly. And so we'll talk more about that. This is just sort of the stack of things that we include in our modeling that kind of allow us to see people more holistically. We're very interested, and this is something that's kind of started before this recession and this the pandemic hit, where we've always been interested in trying to understand not only people's ability to pay, but their intent on paying back the loan, right? So we have models that are designed specifically to understand or to forecast like how much of the proceeds people are going to use to actually pay off their credit cards. Because we do find that if they use the loan to pay off the credit cards, they're a much better risk going forward. And so we've done a lot to enable that and make sure that that does happen and make it easier for people to do that. And we look for behavioral trends like deleveraging, and we're starting to include more of this psychological research in our modeling process. And that's something that's in R&D right now, but I've collected quite a bit of data, and it does look like there's a huge tie between people's personalities and psychological makeup and the way that they interact with financial products, for sure.
Great. So, let's, so thanks for that, Chris, and like kind of setting it up. So one of the things I think is particularly interesting, why I'm excited, to see and the business behind Happy Money is, as Chris mentioned, there is models at every step of the way in terms of their process and how they're using data and applying it to the different sides of business. There's obviously the side of actually making the credit decisions and being able to build that out. But, as Chris mentioned, a lot of that is also actually building out operations and scale out of operations for scale, which is obviously prime for machine learning in terms of optimization. I mean, it's one of the best use cases that we can find. So when we start thinking about kind of like what the environment is driving and kind of landing it into technical operations, which I'm assuming is what most people want to talk about today, we start thinking about, okay, so as the pandemic has actually started building out, stay-at-home orders happen, there's social unrest, recession starting, high unemployment. There's kind of 4 categories of things that really have popped up. One, the environment is really volatile, and that's changed. And we have some observations of that in previous recessions, but that's kind of around that. Uncertainty is also a big problem. We actually don't know a lot of what's going to be happening next. So preparing, kind of like hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. And that's also in kind of rate of change as well as scale out that becomes important. The amount of signals that a business, and this is, I don't think Chris's job is easy at all. The amount of signal and complexity that they're taking in from data sources and building out their models and iterating out their models is exploding. And then there's always this thing of like, what happens when you get it wrong? So if you really, especially in the financial services space, getting things wrong and not being able to catch it in time could be not only potentially catastrophic for the user, but also for an organization that's actually making big bets on this, and growing a business. what do you kind of need to think about? Which is, just general access to platforms and being able to make things change quickly. You need to be able to have access to the data that you need. You need your data science and machine learning teams to be able to work with the necessary things. So access to their systems. You wouldn't want to be able to continue engaging as these new signals come in with customers at kind of any level of the stack. You also want to put in some pretty big, technological and organizational guardrails from a risk management perspective. Everything from who's accessing models to how they're accessing models to how those APIs work. Obviously, encryption and security become really important. And then really at the core of it, and really why MLOps, so if we think about the definition of DevOps as being, being able to accelerate continuous integration and continuous deployment at a high quality. This, when we translate that to the world of machine learning operations, it's exactly that. How do we actually build models, deploy them quicker, get them into production, and react extremely quickly to the environmental variables that are being kind of thrown at these businesses to do that? And so when we think about it from a machine learning perspective, how does this truly translate? We really want to go from one-off machine learning deployments in terms of models. We already, Chris already mentioned the vast amount of models at every layer of the stack in their business in terms of being able to do it automatically, deploy quickly, get it up and running, test the data, make sure that, it's getting into production. Being able to reuse assets, in a lot of cases, building out models around specific customers, users, behaviors will be reusable in other parts of the stack. So how do you kind of componentize that and actually use that? In the world of financial services, there's no there's no lack of security and governance required. So how are we actually doing compliance, risk management, really making sure there's resiliency and transparency? And at the end of the day, and I think Happy Money is like a perfect example of this. This is an ML-driven business, right? This is the value creation that the organization is making is really driven by ML. And so how do you actually understand that value that's being created, measure, and kind of monitor those results? So maybe, Chris, you can talk a bit about how that affected your team.
Yeah, for sure. So these are just some shifts that I'm highlighting here that were going on before the pandemic hit, right? And they're like up to the minute, they're still happening right now. None of these are easy steps to take. We're in this shifting model from like a startup to really a scale up company. We've gone from I think at the beginning of last year we were doing like $5 million a month in originations to now we're up over $100 million a month in originations. So it's pretty decent sized growth. Even from just the beginning of this year, we went from 50 to 100. So we've like basically doubled in our demand, right? And so we definitely need speed for like process standardization. We've gone through and looked at like everything going on in the verification stream, and actually I'll get to that in the next slide. But we're also we're migrating to the cloud from our on-prem infrastructure, which has been difficult, and it's there's a lot of growing pains there, but it's going to be amazing, and we're super excited for it. It's something that my team has been pushing for quite some time now. But to do that, we have to kind of completely overhaul the data architecture that we had before. A lot of our architecture was built, kind of ad hoc as things are happening, very startup style. Our SQL Server database is just an absolute mess. So rather than just moving everything over, it's not really a migration. It's kind of a rebuild and retooling within the cloud infrastructure. And then this last box is the biggest one for me, really, the decentralization of the model code, of our source code. So in the past, what we would do was kind of build models in R or Python and hand them off to engineering to be rewritten in Java or whatever the language is that they were using at the time. And it was a very bespoke solution for each individual model. There was no platform. Everything was very centralized. So if we had to iterate on a model, one example, I had a model that was built to help people save safely each day and give them a dollar amount that they could actually feel safe about saving in our old mobile app. And I made an iteration to that model, and it wasn't even a major iteration, and it was mostly like an aggregation thing. And just to get that deployed to production, it took about 8 months, which is just, it's unacceptable in this period now. And so decentralizing all of those things and democratizing the whole process, allowing data science to actually own the code for the logic has been our big focus. And that's something that Algorithmia has really helped with. And all of these things, like, we have to be able to iterate. We've already iterated our credit policy a few times since the pandemic hit. And in the past, that's something that we couldn't do for at least 6 to 8 months, probably. So if you want to go to the next slide. So during the pandemic, and I've already touched on some of this, but we have this interesting thing happening where we've got a huge increase in demand from applicants and people trying to apply for their debt elimination loans, but we also have a reduced risk for a reduced appetite for risk from our capital partners. So we have to kind of make both sides happy here, right? And to do that, we have to come up with a lot of additional models that look at other types of data sources. We really quickly set up a model that looks at industry-related risk. Who is more likely to be experiencing some sort of income disruption. And we were able to stand up a model for that in about 2 hours using Algorithmia, which was just insane for us, because in the past, as I've mentioned, it used to take quite a long time. And so also answering these issues of the increased demand. So we're balancing, it's a balancing act where we've got a lot more demand, but a lot more risk involved. And we have to be able to see things like bringing in transaction data to assess whether people are having their paychecks disrupted and they didn't get their last paycheck. We have to check for that sort of thing. And we have to automate all of this, because doing it through the verifications team and having everything be done manually is not acceptable. In the first couple months of the pandemic, we were sitting on like $20 to $40 million each month of originations that couldn't get through our verifications process. And so we've got that down to like a much smaller number now, and it's something that we have to continue to iterate on, because there keep being new things that show up in this environment. Oh, the other thing that we're dealing with is this bureau data quality issue. So a lot of financial institutions are not reporting derogatory events anymore, or they're at least holding off on those. So like, we don't know if people have been going delinquent on their payments, if people have charged off even. And so we have to have these alternative data sources, things like transactions, transaction streams, potentially psychometrics and behavioral signals. And we have to get those out to the market as quickly as possible, because we're flying blind without those things.
Right. So if I have to like recap that, what I'm hearing, you have models and pipelines at almost every single layer of the business. You're scaling like crazy, just based on the business going, extremely well. So there's just a volume and scale out that's happening. There is models that are changing at a rapid pace, and kind of like for every single one of those, it's an exponential effect, right? Every model changing rapidly, scaling rapidly, and you have to do that at every layer of the business.
That's right.
So you got an easy job.
Yeah. The other thing too is that if we had it going in the same way that we did before, where everything was kind of centralized and it was a bespoke kind of production process for each model, we'd also run into this issue that we can't kind of reuse the models for different things. So we have that model that I was talking about that tries to understand how much of the loan proceeds someone's going to put toward actually paying down their credit cards. It turns out that model is actually useful for a lot of different things, like parts of the verification process, parts of the decisioning process, all of that. So what we can do now is actually allow each of these different applications to ping that same model, and we don't have to rebuild and reproductionize everything, which is great.
Right. And it's pretty common pattern what you described that you were moving off of. We hear, especially in financial services institutions, the the data science and machine learning teams building models, kind of throwing it over the wall. In some cases, even maybe containerizing it, hoping that an engineering team is successful in rewriting it and then kind of scaling it, and then that even in the best success case, I would argue, like with really good teams on both sides, like just that process is just like it just breaks down really quickly when you're trying to automate new models, new publication. I mean, like it's just extremely difficult to do at scale, even when both sides of the equation are fantastic at their jobs.
Yep, it's totally true. Both sides get frustrated with the other side. We're not speaking the same language necessarily. It's tough for sure.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about more. Let's get a little bit more on the technical side. So if we think about, so we talked a little bit about the business and where these models and how they get built. And, today, we really want to kind of like uncover a little bit more what the operations and management side of the thing looks like. So we like to, at Algorithmia, we like to talk about kind of these like three circles. They're super important. But I'm going to focus on kind of the right two circles, which is, so you got a model, this is great. Let's happen kind of this red side here. You need to do your data verification. You need to build your models, your features, you need to go validate. This is all extremely important. But now there's a whole set of complexities and automation that really come in when you're actually doing what Chris just described, which is scaling a business that's moving at an extremely fast pace. So what happens in terms of deploying those models at scale, connecting to the right data services, being able to kind of register those models into the production applications, building the pipelines, versioning every single one of those models. And then the actual operation side of things, we've been lucky enough to get to know the operations team at Happy Money. They take their resiliency, their scale, and their response time extremely seriously, as they should. And so, you start thinking about like, okay, well, as these models grow, do I have the capacity? Obviously, they moved from on-prem to cloud. Do I have the capacity to go scale that out? Am I managing the infrastructure in the right way? And then super important, obviously, in all of this is like, how do I monitor and report on all of this? Like, do I actually have the right visibility? Because one of the things that's extremely important is as these things, as changes are happening, the rate of change is going so quickly, not finding out something is wrong is really problematic, and it can be extremely problematic, especially in a system where you have kind of models dispersed across the entire business. You have multiple layers of those models, and it could go wrong at any step. Right. So like you have to have really close monitoring, reporting of understanding what's going on. And then obviously a big part of operations, and this is where it's the marriage between the data science, machine learning teams and the DevOps teams and infrastructure teams at organizations, which is how do we do all of this at the highest standard of governance and security from a data network model, infosec, and regulatory compliance. This is I like that you mentioned, Chris, that like they speak a different language. I always find it interesting because when we come to the table and we talk to organizations, it's like, the data science team and the DevOps team are talking about like the super important things to them. The DevOps team is like, well, I'm wearing a pager, something's going wrong. I'm getting at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like I want resiliency, I want backup, I want sensitivity and monitoring. And then, this is a condition to go to production. Like otherwise we're not. And the data science team is like, stop slowing me down.
Yeah.
And both sides of the conversation are super important. But this is why MLOps is really kind of so key to get right at this side of the equation if you're going to really be building an ML-driven business. So we start talking about the complexity, and I'm going to pick on you a little bit, Chris, because I know that Happy Money has quite a bit of complexity. So when we start talking about like the reality is that in most organizations that are really scaling their business in ML, there is a variety of tools, right? It is not a one tool kind of end to end that just works for everything. So maybe you can kind of, if we get a little bit more technical, like because maybe you can kind of describe high level, like some of the, the different libraries and aspects and frameworks that you've had success with and that your team uses.
Sure. So, I mean, our process involves a number of these that you have highlighted above here. We have different members of the team that are comfortable with different languages as well. So we have, and different languages work better for different types of models. So you really need kind of wide access. We have some data scientists and analysts who prefer R. And so we have an RStudio cloud server that's just been set up. We've got Jupyter notebooks. We've got Databricks for model ETL processes. We use TensorFlow for some of our deep learning models that we're developing right now. We've also integrated with H2O AI and driverless H2O, which we use primarily for feature exploration. But yeah, I mean, that's already quite a few. And we have part of our issue with looking for a good model ops platform was that a lot of them were trying to solve every step of this. And we felt like the training environments that were offered or the ETL process that was offered, something along the line of doing the full end-to-end was wrong with each one of them, you know? And so it's difficult to really find like a one-size-fits-all solution for this sort of thing. And what we really found we wanted was something that just integrates well with all of the different platforms that we're using, you know?
Yeah, and from I'm going to work backwards from kind of like the ops thing, which is, if you have to build out, we already talked about the scale, we talked about the repeatability, we talked about all the different places in the pipeline that this happens. Like, if you have to go solve security, governance, registration, scale out, data connectivity for each one of those, it just explodes into, an amount of work that almost no team can really take on. Like, it just very, very quickly becomes kind of completely unmanageable. So starting to think about, from an operations perspective, and again, that's what DevOps does at large organizations, right? Which is start to doing automation and kind of getting standardized way of getting stuff out for that organization while maintaining, an integratable and flexibility and to, use the best tool for the best job.
Yeah, that's right.
Great. So, we talk about the explosion, right? And so again, I'll talk, so we think about, hey, I might actually be coming in from, building out, something in, a training platform, and I'm building out the model, then I need to connect it to different data services. Part of kind of like the journey to MLOps is starting to actually use code repositories and source code management so that we can actually understand what the query code looks like, how we're doing automation. So obviously we want to drive towards that automation using CI/CD tools. There's an explosion of frameworks and libraries, especially, I think there's one thing is a preference, where people forget that you want data science teams to be as effective as possible, as quickly as possible. And therefore, allowing them to actually determine, hey, I'm comfortable with these statistical libraries, I'm comfortable with these frameworks, I can be productive quicker, becomes really important. But as every single time you add variability in terms of a framework and a library, your entire production workflow is going to become a lot more complex. Then you start thinking about, what are my computational resources? I have data sources that come from a bunch of different places. I might have some requirements to be on-prem. I might be actually having a multi-cloud strategy. These are all the things that need to become extremely important from an ML perspective. And how do you actually are able to kind of say, okay, well, if I built a pipeline and I've already built a model and a pipeline, can I actually translate that to the different computational kind of like infrastructures that I need? And then I think you mentioned it earlier, Chris, which is, the application at the time was written in Java, but you probably have an iOS app that's using Swift, and you have an Android app, and you're probably using your web app. And so actually being able to separate out the model kind of like runtimes and inference codes through APIs and scalable APIs so they can be very quickly integrated into the different applications is really key in terms of really creating what I call this kind of like high-speed highway between the data science team and kind of the production, environment. So I like to kind of talk about a little bit about the general kind of like, journey. So this is, one of the things that we commonly see, and Chris talked on one of these, but like this kind of like train car, like this happens, very, very commonly across, organizations. And so you have to start thinking about, how am I actually going to go? If I do one-offs, you can see that, maybe I started with a Jupyter notebook, maybe I'm hosting that, maybe it's on a laptop, it doesn't really matter. Maybe I'm using TensorFlow. Okay, so I figured out the libraries I need for TensorFlow and the versions and the right drivers. Maybe I'm actually connecting because I'm using Bitbucket from my code perspective. I might have actually now wanted to pipeline that with another KRS, model that I built. Somebody else built an abstraction layer around TensorFlow. Then I'm making a decision around, does this need to run on CPUs or GPUs, which is really interesting because we talk a lot about the use of GPUs in training, but in a lot of cases, neural nets can be like the inference can be like really sped up when using on GPUs. And as these new language models are coming up, that are really neural net based, and a lot of imagery models are coming up, like being able to accelerate that on GPUs, it becomes important. Making the decision on where you're going to either one cloud provider or another, or on-prem, and then finally, how do I actually call that? And then for every single one of these steps, so this is a journey that you can think about for like an NLP algorithm as a good example, going all the way to your website. So now, how do I scale this, right? How do we actually, go from a one-off? If I start building one-off pipelines for every single one of these cases, this very, very quickly will become absolutely unmanageable by any DevOps team, unless you're going to start building into the data science team a lot of DevOps capability. And again, that will, has its own problems in itself. So this is something that, we observe a lot in terms of thinking about, if we're going to be thinking about rapid iteration, rapid response time, you want to start thinking about platform. You want to start thinking about, how can I actually have the flexibility to go through these different kind of like optionalities to get to the best result, that I want. This is kind of what we talk about from a democratization perspective. And I think, Chris, you and I talked a lot about this. Like, I think, if I look at the paths at Happy Money today, you have like at least a dozen of these.
We do.
Points, right?
We do. We still have a lot of legacy code that exists that needs its own kind of pathway. We have, it's difficult. Yeah. Right now, though, the DevOps team is actually doing kind of an audit of all of our systems, and as we're migrating to the cloud, the plan is to build everything right this time, like the first time, instead of having all of these one-off kind of bespoke solutions for everything. And so that's been hugely important. The nice thing has been that the importance of ML has been recognized by the company. And so all of our processes and all of our platform pieces are the ones that are going up first, which is awesome.
You brought up one thing, which is, which is the right approach, especially from a startup perspective, which is you start kind of like, you just need to get stuff out there, right? And so like every single startup on earth has, and even smaller projects in large organizations, getting something out, proving value is extremely important. And so the speed of getting something out there. But now as you start kind of like figuring out how you're doing the scaling, portability is important too, right? Because if you have to rewrite every single component of this, like, you probably have a timeline that is not acceptable to you or any of your leadership.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Right. Any new model or any new iteration to a model, we're moving to the new process, and it'll, like, the logic for that code is written by data science, and it's optimized by engineering rather than the other way around.
So this brings us into like the different personas, and processes. And again, we've been lucky enough to really meet, a lot of the great personas at Happy Money. We talk about where they get involved and what they, what they care about at the different steps, right? So you have obviously, Chris and his team who are, really building and doing these explorations and building the models to drive the business. There's some, and a lot of times there's somebody or a product, that is actually working with those teams to kind of create production grade code. In a lot of organizations, we see the data science and ML engineering team kind of being like one same persona. You have a developer that needs to consume this, right? So we talked about how these models are showing up in internal systems. They're showing up in the iOS apps and Android apps on the website. And finally, once those things are running and these things are in production, we're really talking with the DevOps team that is, takes that burden of, if somebody gets called in the middle of the night when something's going wrong, that's them, right? They have a promise to the organization to keep systems up and running and very, very tight SLAs that, and doing that in a secure, governed way. So everybody here is really, really involved from a persona perspective in terms of need to be aligned, kind of philosophically on how you're going to do this at scale, to be able to go through that rapid iteration process. So I talk a little bit about defining access control, security, governance, providing the right documentation, traceability, integration into the capabilities and tools. And then finally, the business leader, somebody here is making, I liked your comment, Chris, that like the organization has finally recognized, or maybe not finally, but recognized the importance that the ML team has to the entire business. I mean, it's not a small thing, right? Investments in the team, investments in technology, doubling down on this. At the end of the day, business leaders are looking for results. They're looking for ROI on any sort of investment and growing that business. And so, the difference between what was there and what is today becomes extremely important. I'd be curious to hear, your story, Chris, a little bit about, like how you've presented to leadership in terms of, is it just showing the numbers in terms of like, hey, look at what we're doing here and like the origination, the speed, like any funny stories around being able to, present to leadership on the value of what your team is doing?
So I think a lot of that has actually come in our investor pitches and our pitches to capital partners. The feedback that we get continuously is that the science pitch is why they're interested, and so it's really the ML and all of the different behavioral models and things that we're building are the differentiation for the company. Otherwise, we're basically just a lender, Yeah. And there's a bunch of those. So like, why would a credit union want to partner with us? It's all really the different things that my team is offering. Not to sound like it's going to my head or anything, but it's kind of the way it is.
I think it's it's being able to showcase the promise of machine learning at scale, right, and delivering on its value. And I think there's a lot of conversations out there about ML, like when ML, the process behind machine learning, the DevOps doesn't get figured out. When you can't get models into production, the entire promise and ROI of investment in machine learning kind of falls apart. And we start seeing and hearing about how so many investments in machine learning efforts have failed because kind of like the end game, the bringing in of all these personas, the scalability, iteration, the thinking about production hasn't really been taken into account. But you kind of have the exact opposite side of that proven out, which is when you do it right, and you actually can scale, when you can actually iterate quickly and get things out, it's transformational for the business, where it's kind of like the leading cry of what the business is doing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So just in the past couple of months, being able to focus my team's efforts on the operations and the verifications process, we've been able to grow our revenue by more than 25% month over month. And that the demand for all of that was already there. It just, we were at capacity with our manual processes. So it really had to, so it's just all these different proof points that are coming in that like ML is incredibly important. It's the thing that we need to focus on the most. And now engineering has a very different conversation with us. And it's really about like, how can we better serve you guys? And like, what do you guys need from us all of the time? And instead of us trying to convince engineering that what we're building is really important and we need to get it out, it's the opposite is happening now. So it's been nice.
It's important for everybody on the line to think about, how do you capture the metrics? How do you capture ROI so that you can showcase it?
That's right. Yeah.
So more important than ever around, especially on that monitoring and reporting side of things. So we talk a little bit about like kind of rapid innovation and scalability. So one of the things that, might be, touch on is, how do you actually do this in, as more and more models go into production, you now want to start optimizing the infrastructure behind the scenes. And so one of the things that we like talking about from an ops and pure kind of technical perspective is moving towards what we kind of call serverless, serving of models. And the reason is really around capacity and scale out. So if you think about on the left side here, traditional capacity planning is, hey, let's figure out everything that's coming in, and kind of build out the capacity for that. As you can see, you have some peaks where you're essentially measuring to max capacity, a lot of waste. But you have to do that, especially in situations where, like as Chris described, where you're getting an influx of consumers. Like the worst case scenario is not being able to service accounts. So you would over provision and over capacity on your infrastructure side. You can do kind of local maximum planning, which is kind of scaling out, auto scaling groups on pure VMs. Trying to kind of match general. This is usually a little bit of a slow start and stop. So, you get some efficiencies, but there's a lot of increase in kind of the managing of overhead on how to do that. And then when you start thinking about kind of this like serverless deployment and serving of models, you are essentially matching, with, second or less, and sometimes millisecond precision, the capacity that you're getting up and down. So not only are you prepared for kind of infinite scalability, talk about infinite in terms of as much scalability as there is in the data center, or in the cloud, which, for the most part can be called infinite. It's really a lower cost and you get a massive, boost. And if you think about what's being said out there, we're looking at 5x expenses on, your, AI-based spend that's being looked at in the next couple of years. So this won't be, if we go backwards to where we started the conversation, which is businesses are transforming themselves into being completely ML-driven business. Now thinking about the operational efficiency of your capacity is going to become a quick problem that is going to want to resolve. And so thinking about the architecture for scale out, not only on the processes, but also on the infrastructure management is going to become super important. And then finally, we didn't really talk about, a ton of it, but this is where the DevOps team really, we've seen in our experience, really put down the red flags in terms of being able to get quickly out to the market, and which is security. So how can we audit the systems? How do we make sure that our encryption and our private certificates are being respected? How do we understand that we have, especially in data that's important, like Chris just described, an entire business that's based on, PII and user data. There's a big burden on making sure that the right models are being accessed by the right people at the right time. So being able to split out access controls between users, groups, models, and computational resources become extremely important from a security and governance perspective. So as you're thinking about your scale out on MLOps, these are the security and governance are two really big things that need to be top of mind, because otherwise, you can quickly lose control or be, exposed in a bad way from a infrastructure and ML perspective. So kind of going back to, why, how are we going to, predict the outcomes of your ML initiatives? Let's plan for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. We don't really need to plan it. We're in it right now. And, what you want to go approach from an ops and leadership perspective is, how are you going to democratize ML across your organization so it can deliver on its promise? How are you going to unlock really rapid innovation, either in tooling, in processes, and in data? How are you going to make sure that security and governance are top of mind from the beginning, right? So it's no good to start saying, hey, look, we'll build the model and then figure out how this system's going to be secure later. We have to think about the end result. And then going to the end result, proving and being able to measure ML value. This makes everybody's, not only the business understands the value that they're getting at it, but data science and machine learning teams get to grow their budgets. You get to do more. And this is overall positive because you can see the effect that it can have, towards a business. So with that said, I'm going to stop presenting. And if there's any questions, we would be happy to answer those right now. In the chat.
Nothing's come up in the chat yet.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can talk actually. So if you want to, like, I think there's a chat window.
Yeah.
If not, my email is diego@algorithmia.com. I'm happy to respond to any emails later or questions I might have.
Yeah, and mine's just cc@happymoney.com.
That's a great one.
And thanks. Yeah, it's one of the benefits of being at the company fairly early on and getting to lock that down. But my company is also, I just want to throw it out there, we're going to be hiring pretty shortly here. So if you're interested in data science at Happy Money, hit me up. Find me on LinkedIn too.
There you go. Yeah, what a great opportunity. A business that's entirely run on ML. It's exciting times.
It's a great offer right now, especially these days, Chris. So I'm a ton of applicants. Well, thank you both, Diego and Chris. That was great. I know everyone's giving you a huge round of applause right now. We just can't hear them. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Please feel free to make your way to your next session, one-on-one meeting, or browse the virtual booth. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the event.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks, Chris, again.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Diego. Take care.